Azura watched in disbelief as Almcivi used the heretics' tools. They relinquished their oaths to the Queen of Dusk and Dawn, and her vengeance would be absolute, for the vain prince would not abide being scorned. And no sooner than Almcivi had completed their rituals and begun to discover their newfound powers, the Daedra Lord Azura appeared and cursed them. And then, in that moment, all Chimer were changed into Dunmer, and their skins turned ashen, and their eyes into fire. And Azura said, "This is not my act, but your act. You have chosen your fate, and the fate of your people, and all the Dunmer shall share your fate, from now to the end of time. You think yourselves gods, but you are blind, and all is darkness." Thus the Dark Elves were born. If you've ever set foot in Morrowind, you've no doubt been harassed by the hoarse heckles of the natives, Outlander and Enwar being the most common, and there's truth in their harsh words, as few places in Tamriel are more alien to outsiders than Morrowind. Emperor parasol mushrooms litter the landscape, and beneath the high canopies of these fungal forests, all manner of flora and fungi propagate. And its fauna is no different. Dunmer don't ride horses, they saddle their guars and travel long distances, high on the backs of the giant arthropods called silt striders. The harrowing howls of these magnificent beasts can be heard for miles, and create a gloomy ambience that is only interrupted by the shrieks of the pesky cliff racers. Morrowind's ecosystem is truly unique, and the elves inhabiting the land are no exception. Hey guys, it's Drew here and welcome back to Fudge Muppet. With this video, we reach the end of the Race Complete Guide series, and who else but the Dunmer to save for last? Covering every detail of this complex race is quite the undertaking, as I don't think any other culture in the Elder Scrolls universe has been so thoroughly fleshed out. So much imagination went into the creation of this race, and they genuinely feel alive and organic. The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind is old enough to buy alcohol in my country, yet it is, in my opinion, the most engrossing, immersive experience Bethesda has ever made. It's the one Elder Scrolls world that I could play for hours on end, just to saunter across its landscapes. A distinct aesthetic goes a long way, but that alone isn't enough. For a world to feel rich and detailed, the lore needs to be as fun to explore as its terrain, and that's why Morrowind is so wondrous. And that's why the complete guide to the province's inhabitants is going to be a big one. So how about I stop rambling and we get right into it. The Dunmer were not always red-eyed and drab-skinned. They were once as incandescent as the setting sun. Their eyes were resplendent, and their skin was beaten gold. And they were once a part of the old merry flock. The Aldmer were once a united people, but over time, dissident movements emerged, and the followers of Saint Velaf were among the most noteworthy. Trinamak the warrior god, Auriel's champion, had taken it upon himself to defeat the Aldmer's enemies both without and within. Were a group of elves to stray from the teachings of the Aedra, then Trinamak would confront the dissidents and bring them back into the fold. But the Velothi movement was not going to be easy to halt, even for one as powerful as Trinamak, and that's because a Daedra Lord was behind this insurgency. One day, Boethia, Prince of Plots, precocious youth, tricked Trinamak to go into his mouth. Boethia talked like Trinamak for a while then, and gathered enough people to listen to him. Boethia showed them the lies of the Atada, the Aedra, and told them Trinamak was the biggest liar of all, saying all this with Trinamak's own voice. Boethia told the mass before him the triangled truth. He showed them, with Mephala, the rules of Psijic endeavour. He taught them how to build houses, and what items they needed to bury in the corners. He demonstrated the right way to wear their skin. He performed the way to walk to achieve an exodus. Then Boethia relieved himself of Trinamak right there on the ground before them, to prove all the things he said were the truth. It was easy then for his new people to become the changed ones. Whether this consumption and excretion of Trinamak was literal or metaphorical doesn't really matter. Trinamak was shamed and corrupted. He became Malakath, the pariah prince, and the gathered Aldmer of Saint Velaf's flock had new deities to listen to. Boethia, with the help of Mephala and Azura, taught the Velothi people how to strive for enlightenment. He taught them that mortality was a test, a series of obstacles to overcome. Mephala taught them how to outwit their adversaries through lies and secret murder. and Azura taught them how to be different from the Aldmer. It was a time of immense change. It was a metamorphosis of body and mind, and the migration from Somerset to Resdayn was their chrysalis, their transformation process. When they arrived in this foreign land, the three good Daedra showed them how to build their new civilization, and the Chimer were officially born. Before we even mention the major changes between Aldmeri culture and Chimeri culture, the stark contrast between the two peoples is clear from aesthetics alone. Boethiah not only taught the Chimer how to wear their skin, but also how to build houses, and it shows, because their structures look as if they were designed by something foreign and strange. While the Aldmer build immense spires of glass that soar skyward, gleaming in the sun's light, the Chimer opted for sinuous towers of magically grown mushrooms, or squat rounded huts made from the carapaces of giant insects. Their architecture is surreal but practical, as their buildings are designed to cope with the harsh conditions in Morrowind. But of course, the major change from Aldmeri culture to Velothi culture was the shift away from Aedra worship into Daedra worship. This is the deviation that set everything in motion. The Chimer were hardly Daedra worshippers in the stereotypical cult sense. They had their good Daedra, the ones who guide and protect them, but they also saw the danger of the Oblivion Lords. Boethiah, Mephala and Azura warned them against trusting specific Daedra. They showed the Chimer what items they needed to bury in the corners, and this process was essential in warding away the four corners of the House of Troubles. The House of Troubles is the name for the bad Daedra, and it consists of Malakath, Mehrunes Dagon, Molag Bal and Sheogorath. They bring only harm to mortals, and avoiding them became a fundamental part of Chimeri culture. But even though they are viewed as malevolent beings, they represent Chimer values. Malakath is the vengeful god, who harbours an eternal grudge against Boethiah. He tests the Chimer for physical weakness, and as a result, the Changed Ones never neglect their physical fitness and fighting prowess. Molag Bal tries to upset the bloodlines of the houses, and otherwise ruin the Dunmer gene pool. With him in the House of Troubles, the Chimer are constantly reminded to keep their race pure. Sheogorath is the test of mental weakness. With his presence, the Chimer are always determined to keep their wits sharp. And finally, Mehrunes Dagon is associated with natural dangers like fire, earthquakes and floods. To some, he represents the inhospitable land of Morrowind. He tests the Dunmer will to survive and persevere. Tests were evidently a crucial facet of Chimeri religion and culture, which was fitting, as they faced a great deal of tests in their newly settled homeland of Resdayn. They fought orcs, needs, dwarves and nords. The Dwemer proved to be their greatest adversary in the late Merethic, early First Era. Not only were they sharing the same lands, but they had major religious differences. The Dwemer were profane, unafraid to insult the gods, and they revered no force above their own intellect. These two factors led to a great deal of animosity. Coexisting would have been impossible were it not for the fact that the dwarves preferred to build the bulk of their cities underground. But even then, both races were starkly aware of the other's constant proximity. The Chimer, as the rest of history would show, were formidable warriors. They harnessed powerful magics and had some of Tamriel's greatest minds. But the Dwemer were so ahead of their time, so ingenious, that no opponent could compete. Thousands of years later, as I tell this story, no culture has created the kind of technological marvels the Dwemer had. Imagine coming up against them back then, when you were few in number and still unfamiliar with the terrain. But as their gods taught them, the Chimer remained resilient, and they weren't going to be sent back to Somerset bloodied and humiliated. But some things did change. The Chimer diverged once more and formed many independent tribes. Some of these tribes became great houses. Other tribes still wander the province as Ashlanders. And it was around this time, in the late Merethic, early First Era, that High Velothi culture transformed into the culture and society of the Dunmer. Of course, at this time, the Dunmer didn't exist, so it was still Chimer culture, but the house system, which saw nomadic life give way to tight-knit political clans, was here to stay, and survives in Morrowind to this day. Membership in great houses is simple. It is determined by birth and marriage. It's not unheard of for outsiders to become retainers in great houses, usually as a reward for loyal service to the house. But for the most part, membership is as exclusive and familial as the tribal structure of old. There have been many great houses over the centuries. Some have faded into obscurity, others have been meticulously wiped out or hidden, while a handful of dominant houses persist. In those early days, the dominant houses were Indoril, Redoran, Telvanni, Hlalu, Dress and Dagoth. In recent times, new houses like Sadras have emerged, while others, like Dwemer, Mora, Rafim, Salafan, and Sofa, disappeared. I won't go into detail about all of the great houses in this video, as we have a dedicated video to the houses on the channel already. I'll link it in the description below if you'd like to watch. But what's important to note is that the founding of the great houses changed the political landscape of Morrowind dramatically. Over time, these houses evolved from glorified tribes to parties involved in the Grand Council. Each house has their own interests, while the Grand Council decides the fate of the province as a whole, allowing every major political player to have a say in proceedings. It is an effective system which can adapt in times of great need. When danger presents itself to a nation, having one all-powerful military leader who can unite the people and represent their communal interests is essential, and so the Hortator enters the fold. We'll discuss the appearances of the Hortator throughout history very soon, but even with the great houses, some Chimer chose to retain their tribal customs and nomadic lifestyle. These are the Ashlanders, the Velothi people. They had once existed in the wilderness all over Resdayn, but with the rise of the houses and the council, the Ashlanders were gradually shepherded into the poorest, most inhospitable regions of the province. They retain a strong culture of ancestor worship, and differ from the great houses in more than just societal structure. A significant religious rift was going to split Morrowind in two, and the Ashlanders held firm to their faith in the good Daedra, while the more cosmopolitan great houses, for the most part, embraced their new demigod rulers. So let's establish some context by getting back to the histories. Tensions between the Chimer and Dwemer were ever present, but a new foe was about to enter the fray. The Nords of Skyrim, under the leadership of High King Vrage the Gifted, invaded Resdayn and brought the region into the First Empire of the Nords. At this time, the Nords were more than just ferocious warriors. They also had numerous tongues in their ranks who were skilled in the use of the voice. With their shouts, they were unstoppable. At least they were to the Chimer. But the Chimer realised that the enemy of their enemy is their friend, and this was the perfect opportunity to work alongside the Dwemer. Both races wished to protect their homeland from the human hordes, and their civil disputes could surely wait. At this time, Indoril Nerevar was chosen as the Chimer Hortator. He united the disparate factions, and he was on good terms with Jumak, Dwarf King of the Dwemer. So they met and created the First Council of Resdayn. By First Era 416, the unified Chimer and Dwemer successfully pushed the Nords out of Resdayn. This peace lasted some 2 centuries, but fell apart in First Era 668 with the War of the First Council. With the common enemy removed, the inherent friction between the two allied races inevitably came to a head once again. They were fundamentally opposed on the most important matters. Everything the Dwemer did, all of their achievements, were considered to be heretical by the pious Chimer. The dwarves meddled with transcendent powers, and one particular project would prove to be the last straw. The chief tonal architect of the Dwemer, a Mer named Kagrenak, was working on his opus, what he called the Animidium Project. The Dwemer had discovered the heart of Lorkhan, deep in Red Mountain, and Kagrenak devised a plan to tap its power using specific tools of his creation. These tools were imbued with mythopaic enchantments, which would allow a mere mortal to channel the Doom Drum's immortal power. But Dagoth learned of Lord Kagrenak's diabolical scheme and brought it to the attention of Nerevar, Vivek, Almalexia and Sofasil, and for the love the Chimer bore their gods, they had to intervene. Thus, to prevent Kagrenak's heresies from being realised, the War of the First Council began. It all culminated at the Battle of Red Mountain in First Era 700. This fateful battle is shrouded in mystery, but what happened here would transform the lives of the Chimer in a multitude of ways. Hastened by the looming threat of the Chimer, Kagrenak prematurely used his tools on the heart, causing the disappearance of the entire Dwemer race. Just this week, Scott wrote a fascinating piece about an alternate history where the Dwemer didn't vanish at all, and had they endured, the future would look quite grim for the Chimer, and the Dunmer would never have come into being. But alas, it did happen, and the Chimer were victorious by default. Treachery followed as the heart fell into the hands of Nerevar's closest advisors. Who exactly murdered the Hortator isn't confirmed, but it is likely that the tribunal betrayed him, and they also reclaimed the tools from Daedric. What came next led to the creation of the Dunmer. They each swore a solemn oath to Azura that the tools would never be used in the profane manner that the Dwemer had intended. Sophasil kept the tools for some time. He guarded them, but also studied them, learning Kagranak's secrets, and how to correct the Chief Tonal Architect's mistakes. And when he divined their mysteries, he did not wait to share them with Vivec and Almalexia. Together, the oath-sworn trio made the pilgrimage back to Red Mountain, back to the beating heart of the dead god. Vivec writes, "At last he came to us with a vision of a new world of peace, with justice and honour for nobles, and health and prosperity for the commoners, with the tribunal as immortal patrons and guides. And dedicating ourselves to this vision of a better world, we made a pilgrimage to Red Mountain, and transformed ourselves with the power of Kagranak's tools. And no sooner than we had completed our rituals and begun to discover our newfound powers, the Daedra Lord Azura appeared and cursed us for our forsworn oaths. By her powers of prophecy, she assured us that her champion, Nerevar, true to his oath, would return to punish us for our perfidy, and to make sure such profane knowledge might never again be used to mock and defy the will of the gods. But Sophasil said to her, 'The old gods are cruel and arbitrary, and distant from the hopes and fears of Mer. Your age is past. We are the new gods, born of the flesh, and wise and caring of the needs of our people. Spare us your frets and chiding, inconstant spirit. We are bold and fresh, and will not fear you.' And then, in that moment, all Chimer were changed into Dunmer, and our skins turned ashen, and our eyes into fire. Of course, we only knew at that time that this had happened to us, but Azura said, 'This is not my act, but your act. You have chosen your fate and the fate of your people, and all the Dunmer shall share your fate, from now to the end of time. You think yourselves gods, but you are blind, and all is darkness.' And Azura left us alone in darkness, and we were all afraid. But we put on our brave faces, and went forth from Red Mountain to build the new world of our dreams. Almcivi may be oathbreakers, but there is no denying that they genuinely endeavoured to forge a greater realm for their new people. The Golden Chimer were now the Ashen Dunmer, but the new Morrowind formed by the Tribunal was glorious and generous. The Dunmer were at first afraid of their new faces, but Sophasil spoke to them, saying that it was not a curse but a blessing, a sign of their changed natures, and sign of the special favour they might enjoy as new Mer, no longer barbarians trembling before ghosts and spirits, but civilized Mer, speaking directly to their immortal friends and patrons, the free faces of the Tribunal. Most Tamrielic societies venerate their gods and pray to them every day, but few can claim to be able to truly communicate with them the way two mortals can communicate. In Morrowind, respect for the good Daedra didn't disappear, but now they had gods who could actually listen to their complaints and offer grand solutions. The Daedra became the anticipations for the Tribunal, which helped reconcile the religious differences. Boethia is the anticipation of Almalexia, but male to her female. She is Mother Morrowind, the warrior and protector of Boethia's chosen people. Mephala is the anticipation of Vivec, but manifold and androgynous. Mephala had introduced the clan systems that became the Great Houses, and Vivec would in turn restore the Grand Council from the ashes of the First Council. And finally, Azura is the anticipation of Sophasil, but female to his male. She is the Queen of Dawn and Dusk, he is the Light of Knowledge. With the Tribunal Temple in charge, much changed. One of their first major achievements was proving to the people of Morrowind that with free gods to lead them, no invasion on their soil would ever succeed. Riemann Cyrodiil's empire unified all of Tamriel, except for Morrowind. The Fourscore War, which of course lasted for 80 years, ended in a treaty and the deaths of both Reman II and Reman III. And similarly, in the year 572 of the next era, an Akaviri invasion was quashed in Morrowind. Even Tiber Septim would not be able to take the province by conquest. Tiber Septim's prophecy held that he would unite all of Tamriel, and as a result, he was galvanized against all the odds when initiating the Tiber Wars. His power was seemingly insurmountable, yet Vivec was able to strike a peace with the new emperor. He avoided an immense loss of life through diplomacy, checking Septim's first for conquest in Second Era 896. The armistice allowed Morrowind to continue to operate with autonomy, without submitting to the imperial yoke. Vivec's peace was divisive at first. House Hlalu strongly supported the move, as they are known for being sympathetic to the imperial cause. House Redoran reluctantly honoured Vivec's decision. House Dress were only interested in how the treaty would impact their slave trade, and so long as strong provisions were put in place to protect it, they were happy to acquiesce. House Telvanni did as they always did, kept to themselves and remained largely uninterested in the affairs of Greater Morrowind, while House Indoril of course backed the tribunal's decision-making unconditionally. Yet many Dark Elves decided that suicide would be preferable to foreign occupation. This may seem like an overreaction, but sovereignty and homogeneity are vital to Dunmeri culture. Imperial occupation was a constant source of vexation to the natives, who do not abide Outlanders, but the Imperial presence was hardly more than pretense. They had scarce little influence over Morrowind, but this discord perfectly sums up Dunmeri culture. Of course, customs and attitudes vary from region to region, from house to house, and tribe to tribe. But the Dunmer were the descendants of the Changed Ones. They did things differently, and their wider society would not be able to coalesce with the Aedra-loving humans, just as it hadn't with the barbaric Nords and the enigmatic dwarves. Not only had their gods taught them to be so different from other mortals, but their environment was equally responsible. The Dwemer of Morrowind lived mostly underground, but the Chimer, and subsequently the Dunmer, have always been exposed to Morrowind's harsh ecosystem. On Vardenfell, ash rains from the sky, and lava pools among the craggy terrain of Molag Amur. And on the mainland, the environment varies from fungal forests to volcanic valleys to fertile fields, each of which are filled with all manner of bizarre flora and fauna. Only in Morrowind is it common to find what the Ashlanders call Fullardas. This translates to rivers of fire. No wonder the natives disdain foreigners. Cyrodiil may have once been a dense and unending jungle, but the Imperials occupying Morrowind in the Third Era came from flat landscapes of verdant forest and lush grass, where the sky is blue and butterflies flit dreamily on fresh breezes, contrasted with the ash-choked air of Vardenfell, where you're more likely to find a fire-spitting Shauk or a squirming Scrib capable of paralysing those who stumble into Quama territory. You can see why Dark Elves tend to be bigoted and condescending. The Ashlanders venture these lands all their lives, nothing but netch leather tents separating them from the elements. They worship their ancestors and maintain their rights to raid and take slaves. Great House Dunmer are more civilized, but they fell from the same tree. The Ashlanders are crude, while members of the Great Houses are subtle. They employ the Morag Tong to kill their rivals, rather than dirtying their own hands. Speaking of which, the Morag Tong is the perfect example of Mafala's lasting influence on the Dunmer people. The Morag Tong is Morrowind's guild of assassins, but unlike the Dark Brotherhood, they are legally sanctioned, and an accepted part of the province's politics. They may seem crazy, but secret murder, lies and manipulation are all part of Mafala's sphere, and she taught the Chimer long ago that her sphere was the key to giving them the upper hand over foreign powers. And if her teachings are so effective against foreigners, why not employ them against domestic rivals too? Ashlanders and House Elves are cut from the same cloth, and while the former holds firm to the good Daedra, rather than worshipping the tribunal, all Dunmer worship their ancestors. This is evident in their burial rites. They believe the departed spirits of their ancestors remain after death, and the knowledge and power of departed ancestors benefit future generations of Dunmer. Remains are often interred in cities devoted to the dead, like Necrom, where the spirits can draw comfort from one another. These sacred sites are protected by ghost fences. A ghost fence is a sign of great honour and sacrifice, as an ancestor may dedicate a portion of their eternal soul to create a fence which protects the clan's shrine and family precincts. Overall, much of what made the Chimer unique persisted with the change of the Guard and the rise of the new living gods. Morrowind was prosperous and peaceful, but also savage. Slave trafficking flourished, and the life of a politician was as unsafe and uncertain as any soldier. But as Azura promised, their reign would come to an end, and Nerevar, Moon and Star would return. The prophecy reads, 7 trials, what he puts his hand to, that shall be done. What is left undone, that shall be done. First trial, on a certain day, to uncertain parents, incarnate Moon and Star reborn. Second trial, neither blight nor age can harm him. The curse of flesh before him flies. Third trial, in caverns dark Azura's eyes sees, and makes to shine the Moon and Star. Fourth trial, a stranger's voice unites the houses. 3 halls call him Hortator. Fifth trial, a stranger's hand unites the Velothi. 4 tribes call him nerevarine. Sixth trial, he honours blood of the tribe unmourned. He eats their sin and is reborn. Seventh trial, his mercy frees the cursed false gods, binds the broken, redeems the mad. One destiny, he speaks the law for Velof's people, he speaks for their land and names them great. As the prophecy claimed, the nerevarine arrived in Seydanine. He was cured of the blight, he was blessed by Azura in the Cavern of the Incarnate. He united the houses and the Ashlander tribes, he defeated Dagoth, and finally, he severed the connection between the tribunal and the heart of Lorkhan. Sophasil was killed by Almalexia. Almalexia was in turn slain by the nerevarine, and Vivec disappeared. And so, the good Daedra were restored as the Reclamations, and the Ashlanders were vindicated for their unwillingness to worship Almsivi. But Vivec's absence proved to have disastrous effects on Morrowind. Firstly, he was not there when the Oblivion crisis began 6 years later in Third Era 433. This calamity weakened the Dunmer, and the tenuous situation was exacerbated by the fall of Bar Dao in the 5th year of the 4th Era. It had been Vivec's power that kept the Ministry of Truth suspended in the air over the city for centuries. But without the warrior poet, the magic faltered, and the celestial rock plummeted into the ground, causing Red Mountain to suddenly erupt. Tsunamis ravaged mainland Morrowind, while the eruption laid waste to Vardenfell. The Argonians, who had long been oppressed and enslaved by the Dunmer, used this series of catastrophes as an opportunity to attack. The Argonians had fared well during the Oblivion crisis, thanks to their hissed overlords, and they were able to ravage great swaths of southern and eastern Morrowind. Their invasion was cut short by House Redoran, yet so much damage had been done already. Dunmer refugees flooded into Skyrim and Solstheim, and the Dunmer race currently sits in ruins. Never in the history of the Changed Folk have their circumstances seemed so grim. Not even when they were strangers in a new land, with the Dwemer beneath them and the Nordic barbarians among them. But this is what Boethia trained them for. The House of Troubles, perhaps with the exception of the recently defeated Dagon, is running amok in Morrowind. Malakath's physical tests are ever present, challenging the Dunmer to survive their current existential turmoil. Molag Bal is laughing as the displaced Dark Elves fight to keep their bloodlines pure. Sheogorath is coaxing the mentally frail survivors into joining him in the asylums. And even Mehrunes Dagon, reeling from his failed revolution, is challenging the Dunmer to survive and persevere. The tribunal may have fallen, but the good Daedra remain, and Boethia trained them for this day. Mortality is their test, and the threat of extinction is their foe in the arena of Tamriel. The question is, will the Dunmer race prove themselves to be Boethia's champions? That remains to be seen when The Elder Scrolls 6 comes along, and we learn how the rest of the 4th Era unfolds. But there you have it guys, the complete guide to the Dunmer. I hope you enjoyed the video, thanks so much for watching. I've been Drew, this has been Fudge Muppet, and I'll see you in the next one.